Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz. I'm a storyteller and author, and this is 18 Questions, 40 Israeli Thinkers from 1840.
We'll begin where we always do. As an Israeli and as a Jew, how are you feeling at this moment in Israeli history?
I feel a mix of concern and privilege and great opportunity. My concern stems from the fact that we are in a very dangerous moment for the future of the state of Israel, still at war over a year after October 7, multiple fronts, 7 fronts that are active against the state of Israel, soldiers being killed, unfortunately, almost daily, civilians being killed, anti-Semitic attacks around the world in places like Amsterdam and elsewhere, Jews being told to take mezuzahs off doors in places like France and the UK. I'm concerned about the political situation in Israel, but I feel privilege because when I think in the arc of history of the Jewish people, there's no doubt in my mind that we are the strongest we have ever been as a Jewish nation. So yes, we're in a very volatile moment, but overall, when you think through thousands of years of history, the Jewish people have never been stronger, the Jewish people have never been more resilient, and the Jewish people have never had a greater capability to defend themselves by themselves. And I feel there's an opportunity because I look at what the outcome of these wars could lead to, and I feel that there is a potential for a new reality that will potentially, and I say that again, potentially, bring decades of security that we have not known before here in the state of Israel.
What do you think has been Israel's greatest success and greatest mistake in the current war against Hamas?
Well, the greatest success to me has been what we've seen on the battlefield, right? The Israeli soldiers, the IDF, has performed in ways that I think many people were surprised. There was the delegitimization over years, for example, of the IDF ground forces and their ability. There was a fear that they would be slaughtered on the battlefields of places like Gaza and Lebanon.
Why is that? Where did that fear come from?
It came from, if you look back throughout, let's say, the last 19 years, or almost 20 years now, of Israeli ground operations, or Israeli operations in the Gaza Strip. Since we pulled out of Gaza in 2005, there have been about less than a dozen, let's say about 10 operations that Israel has had to launch over the years against Hamas in Gaza. There was one just after the pullout in the summer of 2006 when Gilad Shalit was abducted, Summer Rains it was called. There was Cast Lead in 08-09. There was Pillar of Defense in 2012. There was Protective Edge in 2014. Black Belt, Guardian of Walls. All these different, they all always great names. They come up with all these wonderful names. But anyhow, except for 3, everything was always done by the air. Everything was always done by standoff. And specifically under this Prime Minister Netanyahu, there is always a hesitancy to send ground troops into Gaza. During the last time that ground forces went into Gaza prior to October 7 was in the war of 2014, Protective Edge. And the only reason they went into Gaza on the ground was because several weeks into that operation, which lasted about 51 days, was longer, I think, than the Yom Kippur War, was because of the fact that Hamas fighters were starting to pop out of tunnels. It was the first time tunnels were used effectively to infiltrate Israel. And then under pressure from within the security cabinet, specifically from Naftali Bennett, Bibi Netanyahu was left with no choice but to allow or to authorize a very limited operation into Gaza just to neutralize what were then called the cross-border tunnels, the ones that were actually infiltrating into Israel. But nothing about Hamas infrastructure, nothing about the tunnels, 300 miles worth of tunnels inside Gaza. And then in every operation since then, we attacked from the air We didn't do that much to Hamas, even though we beat our chest and pretended and told ourselves stories that we did. So for years, there was a feeling that we shouldn't send troops in. God forbid. Who knows what will happen? And I think that the greatest success was the rehabilitation, to an extent, of the reputation of the IDF and its success on the battlefield. Contrary to what the world will want us or have us believe, the Israeli military has fought in probably the most humane way possible, sparing civilian casualties, fighting in a way of accuracy and precision unseen anywhere in the history of warfare, not just in modern warfare, the history of all warfare. Literally, people should be lining the streets applauding the IDF, but put that aside. I think that's been our greatest success, and we've succeeded. We're degrading Hamas's capabilities. We've eliminated their top leadership, also in Hezbollah. We've degraded and eliminated and destroyed and conquered, and in every encounter, we defeat them. That's a huge success. However, military action is only a means towards a political resolution. In other words, a war can be fought, and it should be fought, like in the attack that was forced upon us with October 7th, pushed us into a war that we did not want. But once you're in war, to be able to extricate yourself from that war and end that war, you need to have a political resolution. And there, I think we have failed, because we have never articulated what that political resolution looks like. What do we want the so-called day after to look like, specifically in Gaza and even in Lebanon? I mean, right now, as we're recording this, there's conversations, there's talk, there's the possibility that a ceasefire deal will be in place in the coming weeks, maybe even sooner, in Lebanon. And then there's criticism on the right, but one second, Hezbollah is still there. Just look at the other day. They fired over 100 rockets, 2 people killed in the northern city of Nahariya when a rocket slammed into a carpentry workshop. So Hezbollah is still there. What exactly, how are we agreeing to ending that war? But again, what do we want the end of that war to look like? We have to explain. We have to articulate that. You have to outline a vision to work towards. The military can help get you there, but you have to use political power and courage to do that.
And so the greatest mistake is that inability, or that lack of a plan afterward for what political resolution the war will.
From my perspective, yes, because I think that what it's done is a number of things. One is it makes it difficult for the military to operate. And you hear this from IDF officers. What are we doing still in Gaza? Why are we still there? Now, obviously, there's 101 hostages. That's a very clear objective. But you're not going to get back the hostages with military capabilities, right? We've succeeded in rescuing a handful, but you're not going to get back 101.
So I actually wanted to ask about that, because I believe yesterday or today, the New York Times reported that the IDF returned back to northern Gaza, and which is where the military campaign first began 14 months ago when Israel went into Gaza to fight Hamas. And the idea the New York Times was reporting on is that wherever the IDF has fought and has left, because they're not looking right now to occupy Gaza or to maintain a military presence in Gaza long term, Hamas has kind of went and filled back that vacuum. So if that's the case, if a lot of the military successes that Israel has had on the ground are in many ways being reversed the longer the war goes on, and it's not going to bring the hostages back, as you're saying, why do you believe that the war is continuing? And do you think it needs to end?
Well, let's unpack that just for a moment. First of all, getting back to what I was saying before about this day after plan, without a day after plan, what it does is it creates those vacuums. So imagine for a moment that Israel said from the beginning, look, I am degrading and eliminating Hamas because I want actor X or Y, it doesn't make a difference who that is, to come into the Gaza Strip and fill the vacuum. So I destroy, I eliminate, but I need now someone to control the area to prevent Hamas from coming back.
So why
and
is there no day
reconstituting
after
itself.
plan?
Because it's political dynamite.
For who?
For Prime Minister Netanyahu. Look at the horizon for a moment and say to yourself, okay, who are those potential candidates to take over control and exert control over Gaza? You don't have many, right? It's not like the Arab countries are lining up to want to put boots on the ground. It's not like any Western country like America or the Europeans are lining up to put boots on the ground. So you're basically left with a couple of very bad options. Option one, you do it. Israel, reoccupy Gaza. We don't want to have to do that. Option two, Palestinian Authority, right? Weak, kicked out of Gaza back in 2007. They're paying salaries to terrorists. They don't know how to confront Hamas. They got problems of their own. And I'll just add to that, if you allow the Palestinian Authority into Gaza, the Palestinian Authority will then come to the world stage and say, hold on a second. We now are in Ramallah, in the West Bank, Area A. We're also now in Gaza. We're a state. Give us statehood. This government in Israel doesn't want to give statehood. So they want to avoid having the Palestinian Authority in control of Gaza. Your other option is what Israel has been maybe talking a bit about, which is some local clans, leaders, militias, whatever. I don't know what that means. To me, it sounds like a recipe towards for anarchy and not something that will bring long-term security. So when you don't have something...
Do you think that's the point? Do you think that that's a flaw?
Well, I think it's a flaw, but I think it's also the point. Because I think what this government, our government in Israel, wants to do is they don't want to give the Palestinian Authority the ability to return. They want to try to maneuver around that. They want to try to bring on board the Emiratis and the Saudis and the Americans in different ways. But they don't want to have to deal with the political dilemma that will come with that. Okay, Palestinian Authority, they are your partner or they're not your partner. Because we don't, this government definitely, with Bezalel Smotrich, with Itamar Ben-Gvir, and with the Likud as it is, can't legitimize Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader, as the leader of the Palestinians and work with him. So therefore, we're kind of trying to maneuver around that. And when that happens, as you said, Hamas just reconstitutes itself in all of these different things. So you'll pull out of an area, you'll walk away for a couple of weeks, and then you'll see, oh, 1 second, Hamas is back, got to go back in. It's not sustainable long term. Now, why is this happening? Because of politics. So it's because of politics that you can't articulate a day after plan. And it's also because of politics why the war continues to some extent. Because it's not bad for this government that the war carries on. I don't want to say that's the only reason. I don't think Netanyahu is that cynical, but I think that there is an element here of this long war is not necessarily bad for his political survival.
Do you think Western media...
Dumbfounded you.
No, because I'll tell you, the big debate I always have is I have to choose my follow-up questions wisely when you have 18 questions. Do you think Western media covers the Israel-Hamas war fairly?
Unequivocally, no.
Why do you say that?
I mean, I've done... I don't count. I haven't counted, but I think that it's probably upwards in over a year now of 400 interviews, most of them TV interviews with CNN, BBC, international media, British papers, American papers, you name it. There is a clear bias against the state of Israel, against the IDF. Look, I've been in journalism.
Wasn't there always bias theoretically? Meaning, isn't a Jewish paper's bias towards Israel something that's usually praise?
Right.
Seen as
no.
admirable?
So I was always, and someone who's been working in this business for now 23 years, have often pushed back on the claim that, the media is just anti-Semitic. I would always say, no, we got to do a better job. We have to explain ourselves better. We have to get the message out better. We have to educate better. We have to, we got to fight ignorance. We have to do a better job telling our story, which all is true. But there is after October 7th, maybe I was naive all these years. I had to wake up. There is a foundation, an undercurrent of anti-Semitism in all of these different places. Now, it doesn't mean that the specific anchor or reporter is anti-Semitic. They could be Jewish. They could be married to a Jew. They could love Jews. But the culture is anti-Semitic. It's how I could be on an interview, as happened to me recently on BBC, and the anchor will say to me, The only reason Hezbollah is attacking Israel is because they're concerned about the deaths of people in Gaza. I mean, absurd questions and comments of like how the way to stop killing is kill innocent civilians. It was like just after civilians had been killed in Israel. Like this is a warped way of thinking. It's how you could be told that I did an interview just yesterday on CNN. And the opening question, without even batting an eye, they wanted to talk about Bezalel Smotrich's desire for annexation of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. And even in the opening question, Yaakov Katz, blah, 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 Bezalel Smotrich is talking about the illegal annexation of the West Bank. No, he's not talking about the illegal annexation of the West Bank. He's talking about the annexation of the West Bank. You are deciding in your question. I didn't get into this with her, but again, here I'll say, this person, this reporter, this anchor, is deciding in her question already that it's illegal. Based on what? So,
do most international scholars say that there is a legal way to annex the West Bank and Judea and Samaria?
No. What international scholars will tell you is that the current situation in the West Bank is illegal. Right? Because they'll say the occupation is illegal, the control is illegal, there are people who think it's already apartheid, the way that there are different rights for different people based on whether you're Israeli, Jewish, or you're Palestinian, the seizure of land, the checkpoints, et cetera, et cetera. If you annex territory and you give equal rights to everybody who lives there, you could still make the argument that you are seizing and taking and stealing someone's land. But if you give the equal rights and they have equal freedom of movement and equal representation.
Is that what Bezalel was talking about, though?
Well, now we're getting into the weeds.
Unclear. The reason I'm asking that is because of your issue with her characterization of the annexation as illegal. But from what you're saying, something like that would be conditional depending on what his intentions were about how. Not to get into the weeds of this. But
I think 100%. It could be. It might be illegal. But how are you already defining it as illegal when you don't even know what it is? Mm-hmm. Right? I mean. We've annexed and applied Israeli law to the Golan Heights. We've applied Israeli law to East Jerusalem, to the old city of Jerusalem, right? Some countries recognize that, some countries don't. Most don't. But is it a legal annexation, or is it Israel has annexed and we don't recognize their annexation? So again, just the framing of the question, my point is, comes with clear bias right there, right? It's something that's just it's there, it exists, and it's part of the reality.
What do you think Western media gets wrong that's causing this culture as you're describing?
Well, that is these are 18 questions, but that's the $1 million question, because if we knew the answer, we would be able to maybe solve it. I think really what they get wrong, because I know a lot of these people, they're not bad people. Again, they're not bad. They're not anti-Semitic necessarily. Maybe some are. I would argue most aren't. They don't know. They don't understand what's going on here. That's the fundamental flaw. See, people, you and I, all of us, have a tendency to think that people are like us. So we go out to the street and we meet someone. And this can happen on the streets in New York or Paris or London or Jerusalem or, near the Gaza border. And you look across the border, you look across the street, and you see somebody who might look a little different, who might be of a different color, might be of a different ethnicity. But you say to yourself, 1 second, they got 2 arms and 2 eyes and 2 ears and a nose and 2 legs, and they talk languages that I can speak as well. So we must have same values. We must get along, right? And that's the fundamental flaw. Like, think for a moment about Kibbutz Be'eri down near Gaza, right? And Vivian Silver, specifically, who was a Canadian Israeli who lived there. She was one of the people who would pick up Palestinians from the border and drive them to their medical appointments inside Israel. They would send money from Kibbutz Be'eri to Gaza when the workers from Gaza for those years weren't allowed in to work, to be able to provide and support for them. And when the Palestinians crossed in on October 7th and murdered and massacred people, it took weeks to identify the body of Vivian Silver because there was nothing really left. They thought she was originally abducted. She wasn't. They found some bone in the end that they were able to use to identify her. So did Vivian Silver get something wrong? I don't know. God forbid that she's not to blame for the fact that she was murdered. But there was a misunderstanding. It was a misunderstanding that we suffered from as a country. Prime Minister Netanyahu suffered from it. Believing that you can pay money to Hamas, give them so-called economic prosperity horizons, and they'll stay quiet, and they'll want to keep quiet, and things will be okay. We can pay the mob extortion cash, $30 million a month, and things will be okay. No, because they want to murder you. So until that coin drops, we will constantly misunderstand and get wrong what's happening here. It's what's happening right now with Iran, as an example. The world looks to the Iranians and says, 1 second, we can negotiate. We can do another JCPOA, the 2015 nuclear deal. We can, work out some sort of framework. But if at the foundation is the desire to destroy you and murder you, there is no negotiation. There is one path, and that is victory. That is the battlefield, unfortunately, that we will have to fight to destroy our enemy.
So I want to move on to our next question, but I have a very brief follow-up before that. And almost an interesting mirroring that, in the same way that many of Israel supporters will talk about the Western media's bias in covering Israeli issues with Israel-Hamas War, many in the West have discussed what they see as biases or limitations in journalism of Israeli media. So I guess as a very brief follow-up, do you think that Israeli media covers the Israel-Hamas War fairly?
No. The Israeli media, for example, and this will be my biggest criticism, whatever, I have a lot of criticisms.
We have a question on that. We'll get to that.
But first, let's talk about for a moment, and for 10 years, I was a military reporter, right? I've written now 4 books on the Israeli military. My most recent one has yet to come out, but it's on October 7th. It's called While Israel Slept, right? Well, how did we fall asleep? What happened that allowed October 7th just from obviously the 24 hours before, but I'm talking 30 years run up. Where did we go wrong? So like we spoke about before, not sending ground troops in, not dealing with the threat, paying money, all these different, what we call in Hebrew, the misconception, the failed strategy. But like I because I was there for a long time as a military reporter, I also know that how it works. And I know that reporters, I strongly, as somebody was the editor of a newspaper for a long time and has been a journalist for a long time, I believe in the value of journalism. But journalism's value is in holding the people in power accountable, ensuring transparency, asking tough questions. I think the media in this country for years, what's the line? Hook, line, sinker, hook, bait, sinker, whatever it is, just bought whatever it was told by the IDF.
In
so
what sense?
we'd go to briefings. The head of military intelligence, the chief of staff of the IDF. I had multiple briefings with them over the years. And they would come and they'd give you their breakdown of Iran and the breakdown of Syria and Hezbollah, and then Hamas would be, they got this, they got that, they got this, they got that, but they're deterred. They don't want war. And then you move on to the next thing. And then you write a story, Hamas is deterred. Based on what? What this guy told you. But why didn't we push back on that? And I already see that now. In the beginning, there was maybe a bit more critical thinking and questions by the journalists, but already a year in,
what?
Well, about obviously how things happened, what went wrong, how the IDF had obviously failed in a miserable way on October 7th in the run-up and, of course, on that day itself. But already they're back to just parroting what they're told by the IDF and the IDF spokesman. So I have issues with that. But I have also issues with the general media, which I think is not telling the full story of this war. Part of the war, and definitely from the Israeli angle, is what happened on October 7th. The 1,500, 1,200 people who were murdered, is about the 250 hostages and definitely the 101 who are still being held in Gaza, is about the soldiers that are unfortunately being killed all the time, and tragic. But it's also about what's happening in Gaza. And we're not showing that story at all.
What do you mean what's happening in Gaza?
Well, I think completely legitimate. See, here's where it gets complicated. We have destroyed Gaza. Now, we've done that. Now, I think it's legitimate what we've done. So don't, just to be clear, when I was asked recently in a BBC interview a week or two ago, but what about what do I think about the tragedy of what's happened to Gaza? And I say, yes, there's great tragedy. My heart breaks for the children who are killed, the destruction of the infrastructure, people's homes that are lost, the hunger and the pain. But I don't feel responsible for it. I think Hamas is responsible for it. But you can have two feelings at once. You could feel pain and sadness for the tragedy of the people who are not all terrorists there, but at the same time say that they are responsible because that's what they did. That's Hamas's fault. But I think that we have to recognize what's really happening and what we're doing. The Israeli people should know what we are doing inside Gaza. And if you watch Israeli news and you read Israeli papers, which I do a few a day, you don't see those pictures. You don't get those stories. So like if you look at the world for a second and you go to your friend in America, in New York or New Jersey or wherever, and you say, what are you watching on TV? They are seeing a completely different reality than what you're watching here on the Israeli TV stations. And that creates obviously a gap. But, they should be showing also definitely more of the version that we are showing, but we should also be seeing their version. We should be giving the fuller picture. And by the way, I've had these discussions. One Israeli TV station, their top executive. You know what the answer was? We have a news show that's about an hour a day, the main news show. We have hostages, we have dead soldiers, we have widows and orphans, and we have, diplomacy and politics. We don't have room for what's happening in Gaza. And I think that's a mistake.
I'm only going to ask for yes or no on this because I have to go on to the next question because I'm getting too greedy with my follow-ups. If you were still editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem
Follow-ups don't count for the 18th?
No, they don't.
Okay.
So hopefully you're not keeping track.
I'm not keeping track.
If you were still editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, do you think that's how you would be running the paper? Yes or no? And if you can't answer yes or no, then
all I can say is I don't know. I would want to hope that yes, but it's not a decision that just the editor of a newspaper would make.
What do you look for in deciding which Knesset party to vote for?
Well, wasn't it like once after some U.S. political consultant once said that like when you watch the debates, you're looking to see who's the guy I want to have beer with, right? So I'm not thinking about who's the guy I want to have beer with. I'm thinking more about who's the person who best represents my values. And who's the person who will... Well, I believe in a number of things, right? I believe I want Israel to be strong and secure. I want Israel to be as equal as possible, have the greatest equality and the greatest freedom as possible. I want there to be freedom of religion. I would love for there to be a separation of religion and state in this country.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, I would demolish the chief rabbinate and things like that. But I look for people who represent the values that I care about. And I also look for people who I think are not extreme. I'm always turned off by radicals. I'm also envious of radicals because I look at them and I say, look at what a life they lead. They know the truth, right? They know what's right. I'm so confused as a person in everything. I'm confused religiously. I'm confused politically. I'm confused culturally and socially. I'm confused. I see more gray than I see black and white. And then I read very staunch right-wingers and I read very staunch left-wingers and I say, wow, they know what's true. I wish I had that. On the other hand, facetiously, I actually appreciate the things being gray and confusing and unclear and being able to process and have these debates and conversations. And I think that's what makes life interesting.
Which is more important for Israel, Judaism or democracy?
Wow. I think Judaism is more important for Israel. but I think democracy is just as important, if that can make sense.
For a second, I was going to say you're the first person to answer the question straightforwardly. You should get a medal. So let me adjust then, and I'd ask, when the two come into conflict, which do you feel is more important to prioritize?
See, I look at the fundamentals of what a Jewish state should look like. So in my view, a Jewish state should have Hebrew as our spoken language. We do. The Jewish calendar should be our calendar. It is. The fact that Jewish soldiers are running into battle in giving out commands in Hebrew for the first time in thousands of years since the days of King David, to me, gives me goosebumps. The fact that we have religious traditions and religious events and holidays, it's all, and the education system, it's all there. I don't need to force it down people's mouths. So when I get to a point of where the question being, do I have to have people marry through the Orthodox, or can I also allow for a marriage through the Reform movement? I would say, let people marry however they want. It's not my business. I want people to be free to make their own decisions.
In public policy, you're saying?
Yeah, and I think that at the end, if you create a free market and competition and you open it up, you know what happens? More people engage. So if I have a monopoly, if I have one store that you can buy my product at, in the end, either people come or they don't come. And if they don't come, they're not getting the product. But if I now have 10 stores to go from, and each one is a little different, I have much more engagement. Mm-hmm. I want more engagement. I think people are missing out on the beauty of Judaism because of the lack of engagement and opportunity, because we're closing it off and we're pigeonholing it to a very specific type of Judaism that is being dictated for us by ultra-Orthodox politicians who all they care about at the end is their control and their political power and the monies that they can get out of the state. But it's not caring about the future of the Jewish people and the engagement of Jews in the state of Israel.
What role should the Israeli government have in religious matters?
Zero, if it was up to me. I think we should have a complete separation of religion and state in the state of Israel. And I think the moment that you do that, ask yourself a question like this. How many people in Israel are marrying through the Rabbanut today, through the chief rabbinate? The numbers are dwindling. They're down to just 20, 30% a year of people who are getting married are going through the Rabbanut. People are looking for alternatives.
20 to 30% of all people who are getting married.
Yeah, because they're looking for alternatives. They don't want to marry through the Rabbanut. The Rabbanut is looked at as too Orthodox.
You're saying they're not having religious ceremonies, or they're not, or there are other
Many
channels?
are not having religious ceremonies. Many are getting married outside of Israel. They're deciding to forego completely.
I mean, as a clarification question, is the only formal means of getting married in the state of Israel through the Rabbanut, or there are other religious institutions or pathways to do so?
We'll step back. Just 70 to 80%. To explain the technicality of it, to be married in the state of Israel, Israel does not offer a form of civil marriage.
Correct.
Okay, so you want to be married in Israel, you have to get married through a religious institution. So if you're Jewish, you have to be married through the Rabbanut. If you're Muslim,
only through the Rabbanut, or there are other options?
Only through the Rabbanut. Okay. If to be registered as a married person in the state of Israel.
So 70 to 80% of people are not going through the Rabbanut, so they're either not formally they're not getting married either in Israel, or they're doing civil marriages outside.
They're doing civil marriages outside of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting married inside Israel, and they get somehow some rabbi maybe to sign off on it. Or they're getting married and they're not really getting married. They're getting.
Would the Rabbanut recognize that, or
if it's a rabbi who is recognized by the Rabbanut, potentially?
Is that including the 20-30% number you gave? Or no?
No, that would kind of be out.
No, only because the number startled me. So
and then you have people who are not even doing religious ceremonies at all. You know, you're marrying your friends. Mm-hmm. You're overseeing the ceremony. And then they're just, recognized as spouses, and there's a status that the state will give you for the benefits of, God forbid something happens, and inheritance and whatever. But a lot are doing some form of civil marriage outside of Israel. So when you have, I have a friend who recently got married, did a chuppah ceremony here, not a chuppah that we would be used to, and then flew off to Cyprus and got married there, got a civil marriage, came back, went to Misrata Pnim, to the Interior Ministry, got registered as a married couple, which is insane in of itself. I mean, like, why are we sending people to Cyprus to get married? Why can't we offer that here? By the way, there's a whole other problem with the fact that you have hundreds of thousands of Israelis serve in the army, work, pay taxes, but because they're not halachically Jewish, they have no way of getting married in the state of Israel. I'm talking specifically about the children of immigrants from the former Soviet Union. So when they came here, about 1 million in the late 80s, early 90s, many of them were not halachically Jewish. Those people can't get married here. So if your child tomorrow, halachically Jewish, goes to the army, goes to college, meets somebody who is the child of former Soviet Union immigrants to Israel, went to the army, is in college, speaks Hebrew, totally Israeli.
The state is making a decision for them that they are not able.
Well, they're not considered Jewish. So how does your child and that child get married? They can't in Israel. So either that person has to convert, which, let's get into that. I mean, that's a nightmare.
Do you think the vision that you're laying out is realistic and possible?
Oh, for sure.
Do you think it will happen?
I hope it'll happen one day when the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, lose their stranglehold over our religious institutions in Israel and over our politics. In other words, if you have a government...
Will that happen based on on the birth rate and the growth of the Haredi?
It's not about the birth rate, it's about politics. It's all about political
But in the
control.
political sphere as well, I imagine that the growth of the Haredi population in Israel will influence their political weight in the Knesset more broadly, no?
Maybe, but ask yourself a different question, right? You had a government here in 2021 that was founded by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. It had no ultra-Orthodox in the government. Why didn't they pass a law, right? Why in 2013, when there was a Why in 2013, when there was a government that also did not include the ultra-Orthodox, was Yair Lapid, Naftali Bennett, Netanyahu, Tzipi Livni, why didn't they pass the law then either?
Why not?
I can tell you the answer, because in both cases, Bennett, specifically in 2013 government and in the 2021 government, always didn't want to make too drastic moves against the Haredim that would lead to them not being willing to sit with him in a future government. So he was always keeping his eye. Every politician one day wants to have the Haredim as their partner, and they don't want to do anything that would upset them. But really, for the future of the state of Israel, it's something that's needed. It's absurd, in my view, that you have citizens of this country, not a small number, hundreds of thousands, who serve in the army, who pay taxes, who are law-abiding citizens, and they don't get, there's duties and there's rights in a democracy. They are fulfilling their duties. Where are their rights? And one basic right in any country is the right to get married. And the fact that these people can't get married, in my opinion, is scandalous.
Mm-hmm. Should Israel treat its Jewish and non-Jewish citizens the same?
100%. I think we should. I think for the most part we do. I think we could always do a much better job.
Why do you say the most part?
Well, I mean, we have, out of about 10 million people, we have about 2 million or so who are Arabs, Israeli Arabs, most of them Muslims, some Christians, there's Druze, there's Bedouin, but you got about 2 million and change who are not Jewish. They're Israeli citizens like I am. They have Israeli identity cards, Israeli passports. Their rights are supposed to be just like the rights that I have. But we also look at them differently. They are discriminated against on the streets, in the workplace, at the airport. They are profiled in certain ways. And sometimes it's legitimate. Sometimes it's not. We do have real security concerns. But I'll take you back even to when, the Bennett-Lapid government was formed in 2021. And I looked at that government. And I said to myself, 1840, right? This is about, you told me the Zohar with a messianic time. I don't want to say that
it's a good plug for our other podcast.
Yeah, I don't want to say that this was a messianic time. But it was, you had the right wing, the left wing, the secular, the religious, and Arabs all sitting together in one coalition. To some extent, that should be what every Israeli wants.
But many Israelis were very upset by that.
They were hugely upset.
Not just religious.
No, very upset. I think there was a few reasons why they were upset. One was because there is just a general mistrust or distrust of Arabs. There's also a massive delegitimization campaign of specifically Mansour Abbas, the leader of the Ram party, which was part of that coalition, by Netanyahu and by the Likud. He's a terror supporter. He's a Muslim Brotherhood supporter. He's radical Islam, major delegitimization, all aimed specifically at just delegitimizing Bennett and Lapid and their government. But in my view, this is what we should all want. I mean, we should want integration. We should want equality. We're here. We're living together. We're stuck. Don't we want to get along? I mean, how crazy do you have to be to say that this historic moment in time, when Arabs are sitting in a coalition government for the first time, integrating in a way that we did not know would be possible, and you, because of your political differences, and your rival is willing to say, I am going to destroy that and destroy it for years to come, so it can never repeat itself. You really have to be a political cynic to do that. I'll tell you just one other thing. Remember in 2021, right before this government was established, there was the Operation Guardian of the Walls, Shomer Chomot. And in this operation, besides for us fighting in Gaza, again, just from the air, no troops on the ground, there were riots in the mixed cities. At the time, there were lynches of Jews in Lod, in Bat Yam, in Haifa, in Akko, and Jews against Arabs. We were told that any operation in the future, any war in the future, would lead to an Arab uprising across the country. There was a unit that was established. I was at the time still in reserves. There was a unit that was established that was part of the Home Front Command, whose job was going to be to secure Kvish 6, Road 6, the main highway that crisscrosses the country, because when it goes through what's known as the Mishulash, the triangle, which is a group of Arab towns, the expectation was they would try to block it. So if your IDF forces that need to move from the south to the north or vice versa, they wouldn't be able to go on that highway, so they would need to deploy army forces to keep that road open. We've been in war now for almost over 13 months, into our 14th month. I've yet to see one riot in a mixed city. I've yet to see one road blocked by the Israeli Arabs in this country. So I ask myself, one second, we thought that this was going to be now the norm. It's not. Something changed. Maybe the shock and trauma of October 7th. Maybe the aftermath of, yes, Mansour Abbas being in a coalition. Maybe something else is going on here. But is it not a moment that we should say to ourselves, as the majority of this country, the Jewish majority, let's look at this. Let's seize this opportunity. Let's use this moment in time to integrate the Israeli Arabs even more into Israeli society. Now you tell me, is our government doing that? Have you seen any evidence of that being spoken about? Any budgets that are being invested in that way?
I think this government would be probably a little bit surprising if that was the case. But
I understand. But again, I think about the future of this country, the one that my kids and grandkids will grow up in. I want it to be safe, secure, prosperous, equal, democratic, and free, and Jewish. I don't see the government working for that. And I think that this is just one of the amazing missed opportunities when I think about what's been going on.
now that Israel already exists, what's the purpose of Zionism?
Israel exists, but it's still a country that's greatly challenged and threatened. And the Zionist idea is challenged and threatened around the world. The whole notion of self-determination by the Jewish people and a Jewish nation state is something that is still very much not accepted. And I think that it's something that we need to continue to defend and explain. But I would also say that we need to explain to our own people, why are we here? You know, just in the last few days, I've spoken to a few people, even in Amsterdam, and the aftermath of what went down there at, with that so-called pogrom. And Jews say, yeah, terrible 1930s Europe, but still safer here than in Israel. Better quality of life here than in Israel. So we still have a challenge, right? So why do we have Israel then? And I think that even Israelis, when they look at Israel today, they ask themselves, why should I live here? Why should I put my life on the line? Why should I risk Why should I go serve in reserves for 250 days or 300 days? So Zionism, this idea, that foundation, is of great importance.
Mhm. Is opposing Zionism inherently anti-Semitic?
It's a tough one. I don't think it's inherently anti-Semitic. I think it's, people could say, I think that Zionism, for example, equals racism, right? And they could bring you examples of what's happening in the West Bank or even what's happening here in the state of Israel. Would I automatically say that that person is anti-Semitic? I'm not sure. I don't think that saying, I'm being critical of the state of Israel is anti-Semitic. No. Saying that I don't think Israel should exist is being anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. Saying that I think that the Jews don't deserve a nation state, I think is anti-Semitic. Saying that, so basically, I think you have to walk a line and create the right balance between what is legitimate criticism of Israel and what is criticism of Israel that crosses the line into that realm of anti-Semitism. Yeah, there are different people who will give you different rules, mm-hmm. right? I think it was Natan Sharansky, the great Soviet dissident and Asir Tzion and minister and head of Jewish Agency and author, thinker, great man, came up with the 3D rule, right? Delegitimization, demonization, and double standard. So if the criticism of Israel falls into any of those categories, like, you criticize Israel, but you don't criticize someone else for the same thing, or you try to delegitimize Israel. You say, no, Israel was attacked. They don't have the right to act in self-defense. Israel show restraint. What do you mean? They just killed our people. Or you demonize Israel. Israel is committing genocide, right? When we're not. All of that crosses the line into a form of criticism that is beyond the pale and does start to move into the realm of anti-Semitism.
Can people be mistaken or wrong without being anti-Semitic? Meaning, can someone say that Israel's committing genocide and just be wrong, but not necessarily be anti-Semitic?
Yeah, for sure.
Or do you think that fundamentally the view they're expressing is anti-Semitic?
No, I think people could definitely be wrong. I mean, most people are, as a matter of fact. The vast majority. I think people are ignorant, uneducated, uninformed, don't really understand, don't know what's going on. I think that people think that, for example, Hamas, that we started this war, right? I think that, people think that we've been occupying the Gaza Strip, even though we pulled out in 2005. People don't know that there's a border with Egypt, right? 14 kilometers long. Why is Israel giving them supplies? Why not Egypt? People don't know a lot. And that leads to a lot of just misinformation. They also read something, they see 40,000 people killed. They said, okay, these are, Israel's massacring people, right? There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of ignorance, uneducated people that leads to bad conclusions and decisions. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're an anti-Semite. It means you're an idiot.
Is the IDF the world's most moral army?
That's a nice slogan. I can't speak on behalf of every army in the world, but I can speak on what I know after writing extensively about the IDF over the years. No military that I've ever come across, and I've heard this from other generals and military commanders of other armies around the world, no one does what the IDF does. I mean, think about it for a moment.
Such as what?
You have an enemy in a building. He's a really bad guy, right? Now you want to kill him. So does it make sense to call up him and his family and say, leave the building so I can destroy the building? I mean, who does that? Who gives away the element of surprise, right? We're just yesterday, we decided we're going to bomb a couple of buildings in the Dachia neighborhood suburb of Beirut, where Hezbollah's stronghold is. We announced a couple hours before, we're taking out these 4 buildings, please evacuate the area. But the bad guys will get away too. Yes, civilians will, but also bad guys. We dropped millions of leaflets to tell people to flee areas before going in there. Aren't the bad guys also going to leave? Yes, they will. Some will stay back. A lot will leave. We do this because we have a number of considerations. One is we want to preserve legitimacy for the war. And we know that if too many civilians are killed, we lose legitimacy, we lose the world's support, we need America, et cetera, et cetera. That's a very transactional, practical layer. I think there is a moral, ethical, principled layer, which is at the foundation. We don't do that kind of stuff. We don't just kill people. We mikadshim et hachayim. We sanctify life. They sanctify death. So because of that, we preserve life. We go to more length to save them than they do to save themselves. It was Golda Meir who said, the moment that they will care more about their children than we do, there won't be war here. And she's still right, unfortunately.
Are you on Twitter?
I am.
So I'm curious, and I guess this is also in the realm of the kind of overlaps a little bit with Western media in general. But on Twitter, there are many discussions and people bringing up, and there's always this like inter debates happening on Twitter where people will bring up IDF conduct in different things happening in Gaza. There was a New York Times article about human shields, IDF soldiers using Palestinians, sending them into buildings that may be booby-trapped. There were, many other reports in Times and other papers. What do you think they're missing or getting wrong? Or how do you understand those pieces either as correct or incorrect in your view of the IDF?
Let me take one step back, though. Don't get me wrong. There are soldiers and there are commanders who do things that are wrong, right? Who make mistakes, who issue orders that might need to be considered illegal. There was a video that came out recently of a Palestinian who had been tied to the hood of a Jeep, a terror suspect, and was tied up and driven out. Those are things that shouldn't happen, right? Human shields was something that the Israeli Supreme Court said is also not legal. So there are, and if it's used, that is wrong. That is a rotten weed that needs to be uprooted and dealt with. But I'm talking about the overall doctrine, method, tactic, strategy, training regimen, you name it. This is a military that operates on a foundational level of a whole different caliber than anyone else. And I think that that's what we have to look at. So that story that you quote from the New York Times or whatever it might be about a specific incident that happened in one street in one day.
In some ways, that's inevitable in the fact that you're dealing with
This is
a large
a war.
scale.
Wars are terrible. Listen, people forget something basic. The whole reason I have a lot of criticism of Israel and about this government and what led to October 7th. We basically buried our head in the sand and told ourselves stories and fairy tales. But there was something at the basic level. We didn't want war. So we did everything possible to kick that can down the road to prevent and delay what unfortunately crashed through the border on October 7th in the most violent, disgusting way possible. But the inherent desire to avoid war is something that makes sense because look at what happens. War is terrible. Look how many people are killed on their side and, of course, on our side. So you're going to want to always avoid it. People around the world, for some reason, fail to recognize that, right? War sucks. It's terrible. But when it happens, it's violent and it's deadly. And there are people who get killed and infrastructure and homes and just get destroyed. It's the price of war. But you're going to have bad. You're going to have mostly good. I look at the bigger picture. 99% of what the IDF does are not those incidents. Those happen. They should be dealt with, and they are dealt with. But that's not the norm. So we're the New York Times, those newspapers or those outlets get it wrong, is when they try to portray this as if this is the IDF. That's
Those are the rule versus the exception.
Correct.
If you were making the case for Israel, where would you begin?
Wow. I mean, I'm inclined to say right now that I would begin with October 7th. And I would make a simple argument. All the mistakes that we made that allowed October 7th to happen came from a desire to avoid the war that is now being fought. The misread of intelligence, the pullout from Gaza, the way we tried to contain and separate and empower and suitcases of cash and all that stuff. All bad now when you look back at it. I mean, if I told you today, the way to get quiet now after this war is give every month $30 million in cash to Hamas, you'd think I'm crazy. That's what we were literally doing. But you look at all of that and you say, 1 second, we tried so much and this is what we got. And now you want to take away our legitimacy to be able to fight. There's something wrong with you, not with me. There are people who might say, no, we need to go back thousands of years. We need to go back to 1948. You'll lose people there. I think we got to stay in the now, in the here, and talk about what is happening right now and why is this war continuing. You could obviously expand it to the wider conflict that we're fighting against Iran and others, but this is something that I think is the case that people forget at this moment in time.
Can questioning the actions of Israel's government and army, even in the context of this war, be a valid form of love and patriotism?
Yeah, I mean, I do it all the day. I do it all day, every day, and I love our country, and I think I'm a great patriot, or at least I strive to be. But I have great criticism, many questions. I think this government has failed its people. In my eyes, I think it's absurd that 13 months, almost 14 months after October 7, the greatest disaster in modern Israeli history, man-made disaster, this government and those people who were responsible for that are still in their positions, whether it's in the army, in the Shabak, and in the government and in the Prime Minister's office.
Do you think firing Yoav Gallant was a mistake?
I think firing Yoav Gallant was a political ploy for Netanyahu to remove from his way someone who was a potential political rival, who was gaining popularity, who was proving to be difficult in passing a scandalous law that would give an exemption to the ultra-Orthodox, to Haredim, from serving in the IDF, and was also being a thorn in his side in cabinet discussions on issues like a hostage deal and more. But do I think that Yoav Gallant does not bear great responsibility for October 7th and should have had to leave his job anyhow? Oh yeah, he should have had to leave his job anyhow, right? But why he was fired has nothing to do with his culpability and what led to October 7th. This was politics.
What do you think is the most legitimate criticism leveled against Israel today?
Well, I'll go back to the criticism that I mentioned. I think that we lack... it focuses on Gaza and Lebanon. What do we want to see happen? But I think the bigger picture, from my perspective at least, is that we need to grow up, right? We're not a small country anymore. We're not a helpless little country. We are a strong, powerful country. We're challenged and threatened unlike anything in the world. Look at Russia, Ukraine, terrible war. Costly in lives and in economics and in everything. But it's one enemy, Russia, against Ukraine. We're fighting 7 enemies all at once around our country. We're the most threatened country today in the world. Most attacked country in the world. And even with that, I say, okay, where do we want to go? What do we want to see here? How do we want to solve this conflict? Are we saying we're stuck? What is the vision? Like now, I was asked, I did a few interviews yesterday being asked all about annexation. Is it going to happen? Judea and Samaria, West Bank. Smotrich says he wants it. And I was thinking to myself, since 2015, Netanyahu has had coalitions with a right-wing majority. No one of the left or even center in his government had the ability to pass an annexation law with the snap of a finger. Just bring it to the Knesset, vote on it, done. Why hasn't he done it? Because he doesn't want to do it, right? So all this talk of we need to wait for...
Why doesn't he want to do it?
Well, I think he's afraid of decisions that will cement and be finite in what will happen. So to say I am applying Israeli law and annexing the West Bank is a finite decision. You can always walk that back, but it will bring a tsunami onto Israel potentially. And that's why he says, I want to try to coordinate with the Americans. I wanted this, I wanted that. But at the end of the day, it's a decision that we have to make. Is that where we want to go? Or do we want to go towards separation from them? What is our vision? That's for us to decide. It's not for Donald Trump or Joe Biden or somebody else to tell us what to do. It's for us to decide here. Do you know what he wants to do? Do you know what Netanyahu's vision is for how we're supposed to all get along here or not? I have no idea. But I don't think, it's a bit off tangent, but I'll tell you something else. Like I saw yesterday on TV, a top general who I have some respect for, who said, you know who's responsible for the fact that 101 hostages remain in Gaza? It's Joe Biden. He's responsible for the fact that there's not a deal. Why? Because he forced Israel to allow in 200 trucks of humanitarian aid every day into Gaza, and therefore Hamas is not coming to make a deal. So I say, okay, hold on. So basically, it's Joe Biden, or is it that Joe Biden said to Bibi, let's run with his scenario, listen, Bibi, you want to get from me weapons, you want to get from me supplies, you want to get from me diplomatic cover at the UN, you want to get all of that. To get that, I want you to do this. Now, Bibi sits there, or the cabinet sits there, and they decide, okay, we can have this, but we have to do that, or we cannot do this, and then we might not get that. What should we do? So who's making that decision? Joe Biden or our government? So when people say it's Joe Biden, I say, no, 1 second. I don't know of any relationship in the world, not with my kids, my wife, my coworkers, no one, that I just say, give me whatever I want, and I have no quid pro quo, no commitment to you, no responsibility to you. Do you know of a relationship like that? I don't. But for some reason, we think that when it comes to America, they just have to give us whatever we want, and we can do whatever we want.
The criticism that many in the pro-Israel community had toward America was unfair?
No, it could be. I have a lot of criticism of America. I think their policies also are sometimes misguided. But I also don't. But I look at it, I say, I could be critical, but I could also say, 1 second, they don't owe me anything. In other words, why do I think that they owe me? They don't owe me. It's as if we expect them to just give us whatever because we're right. Well, maybe they don't think we're right. And even if they think you're right, they have their other considerations. They don't owe you anything. So I mean, like, we live in this idea as if it's a one-way street. No, it's not. And Bibi at the end makes that decision. So when people say to me, are the Americans going to stop the war? I'm like, what do you mean America's going to stop the war? Israel is going to stop the war. This is, by the way, what am I getting at also at the end of the day? It's a ploy. It's a tactic. It's them pulling wool over your eyes or whatever the term is. It's to get you to think that it's not Netanyahu. It's not the government. It's someone else. It's the boogeyman who's making us stop, right? So when the war ends and people are critical, it was America that made us stop. Don't be critical of me. It was America. I'm sorry. I don't buy into that. This gets back to the core of what I think is the biggest criticism that I have is grow up. We're a big country. We're a strong country. We're powerful militarily, economically. What I said in the beginning, the greatest we've ever been in 4,000 years of Jewish life. Let's make decisions of where we want to go. What do we want to do with this power?
Do you think peace between Israelis and Palestinians will happen within your lifetime?
I'm thinking in my head how old I am and how many years it'll take.
My dad has a joke that I say that to guests. Okay, fine, within my lifetime, but
I mean, you're about 20 plus years younger.
No, I know.
I.
The joke will work better with older
No,
guys.
I'll tell you. I think it is possible in my lifetime. I'm 45 now. What I've been saying to people now, peace is possible, but I think in about 50 years. Because I think what needs to happen, we need to have generational transition within the Palestinian people. We need to have a de-radicalization process that takes place. In other words, anyone who thinks that the Gaza war just ends and, we pull out, someone rebuilds, someone takes control, and then things just go, everything's going to be okay. It's not going to work that way. You have to de-radicalize. You have to change the education system. You have to change the way people are.
Well, it's actually the next question will be about what should happen with Gaza. But I'm curious, do you think that peace will happen? You say within the next 50 years. What gives you?
I think that in the next 50, I think that it's possible if the right steps and decisions are made. And I think that in 50 years, and please God, I live till I'm 95. At least, then it's possible that I will see that.
Okay, so our next question. What should happen with Gaza and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict after the war?
Well, so I would want to see an entity that takes control. I would want to see an entity that is robust.
Who are the candidates that are realistic that you would think?
Look, I don't honestly. I don't see anyone but the Palestinians themselves.
But meaning who? PA? Obviously not Hamas.
I think we don't have many options but the PA. I could be totally wrong. There might be something else, but I think it's got to be something that has to do with the PA. I think Israel should be careful trying to engineer and manipulate what that leadership is going to look like. I think it needs to be something that will have the backing of the key Arab powerhouse countries, Egypt, Saudi, UAE, of course, the Americans. But I don't see many other options besides for some formal PA-like entity. But it has to come with not just reconstruction, not just economic recovery, but it has to come with a de-radicalization process. I mean, something along the lines of what happened to Japan, something along the lines of what happened to Germany in the aftermath of World War II. And if you do it right, and you rebuild their education system, for example, in a way that doesn't call to kill and murder all of us, but calls to live with us in coexistence. And that will take time because you have everyone who's now in high school, in grammar school, everyone who's coming out of these places, everyone who's older, they were taught to hate us, to want to murder us, even if they're not active Hamas fighters. We need a generational transition. And that's why a generation is about 25 years. So I think that this will take at least 2 generations for that to happen.
Do you think Israel is properly handling the Iranian threat?
Yes and no. I think that Iran is the catalyst of everything bad that is happening here. I think that
you've written about Iran. This is, I believe, one of the...
My first book was called Israel versus Iran, the Shadow War.
Yeah,
it's no longer a shadow war.
Sunlight.
But I think that the Iranians are they are the generator of all bad that is happening here. I mean, so there are some people who say, okay, let's hit them with sanctions, let's cut off the funding, and then they won't be able to fund Hezbollah and Hamas. I think it's different. I think we have to I think the Iranians, the Ayatollahs, the leaders, the IRGC have for too long felt immunity. America's afraid to do anything in Iran. Europe, forget about. Even in Israel, there was a hesitancy for a very long time. We saw, for example, in April, when they first attacked us, with 300 and something missiles and cruise missiles and drones, our response was nothing almost. We took out a little radar that belonged to an S-300 battery. When they attacked us again in October, with 180 missiles, some of which landed and caused extensive damage, we finally hit back and took out more or all almost of the S-300 batteries that had been supplied by Russia to Iran for air defense systems. I thought back in April, we should have attacked their oil refineries, their military bases, and their nuclear installations. I thought after October, we should have done that, and I think we should do that now. Well, I think it gets complicated. There is, on the one hand, again, we're working in a dynamic international environment that requires us to listen to our friends in America who are asking us, don't do that. We'll help you. We'll give you, hold back here. We'll help you if the day comes later. So we're trying to maneuver within the constraints of what the Americans and the Europeans are putting on us, and we have to be aware of that. I think there's a bigger issue of that we know that if we attack their nuclear facilities, that almost definitely they will break out to a nuclear capability, right? Why? Because
that will be the ultimate defense for them.
Yeah, because then they'll say their story will be, listen, we told you all, we need this weapon because we need to defend ourselves from Israel, which is trying to take away our weapon. They have it. They don't want us to have it. Now we definitely need it. And then they'll do it. So for so long, Israel has held back. Now, it's important.
So why do you still think what you think then? Like, how do you get around those concerns, in your view?
Because when I calculate it all up in the air, I think that this is a moment in time that they are the most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. We have the greatest amount of international legitimacy, and we have the capability. And now is that moment. And it's also a moment that you don't know, you never know for certain what's going to happen. That risk exists. Mm-hmm. What adds to that risk is the fact that when you look at the other 2 instances in history that Israel has destroyed in another country's nuclear program, 1981 Iraq, 2007 Syria. I wrote a book about that, Shadow Strike. you saw that it was one facility above ground destroyed, but it was also a program being built for those countries, Iraq and Syria, by a foreign actor. France for Iraq, North Korea for Syria. So the moment you destroyed the facility, for them to rebuild, they would be dependent on that foreign actor coming back and rebuilding. Iran has the technological know-how, brain power. So you could destroy Natanz, Fordow, Isfahan, Parchin, and Bushehr, but they can just, over time, they'll be able to rebuild because you can't kill the knowledge. But the other part of it is that you don't know what's going to happen. And you got to take some risks in life. And what's more important now in this point in history, in my view, is them learning a lesson that what they're doing is unacceptable. Because if they don't learn that lesson, I don't think they've learned that lesson, the Iranians, then they will continue to attack, they will continue to support terrorism, and they will continue to generate instability and pursue nuclear capability all throughout the region and the world.
Where do you identify on Israel's political and religious spectrum? And do you have any friends on the quote-unquote other side?
Wow, it's like we're Iran nuclear to religious
it's the
identity.
With 18 questions.
Look, I identify, I think I'm as someone who's centrist, someone who is modern Orthodox, I guess. My wife might laugh and say, Orthodox light, maybe, like Coke Zero or Orthodox Zero, if there's such a thing.
And do you have friends on the other side, politically and religiously?
Definitely. I have family on the other side, politically and religiously. I have ultra-Orthodox family members. We don't see eye to eye on much, but we get along. I have siblings who are far left. We get along great. Don't agree on too much. Where I have problems is when there are people who delegitimize the other opinion, aren't willing to recognize the other side. That's something that I have difficulty with. That polarization is I think corrosive to society.
Do you have more hope or fear for Israel and the Jewish people? For our last question.
I'm hopeful. Maybe I'm saying that to convince myself. I'm very concerned because I could see how things can go wrong. I could see how things can go wrong on the battlefield. I could see how we can make the wrong political decisions. But I'm hopeful that at the end of the day, the Israeli people, I'm thinking now less about our political leaders, because I don't look at them as leaders. They're political leaders. Leaders are meant to take us in a positive direction. But I look at the Israeli people and I see the commitment and the dedication and the self-sacrifice, and you're just in awe. It's not normal what goes on here. It's not normal that a rabbi I know who lives in our neighborhood, not far from here, by Avi Goldberg, recently was killed in Lebanon. 8 kids. What was he doing there? Ask yourself, why is a father of 8 going into war? And laying his life on the line in the defense of the state of Israel. I mean, where do you see that kind of stuff? And I think it's a remarkable characteristic and trait of our country and our people. And that gives me immense hope for the future of Israel, for the success of Israel, and for what the future holds for our country.
All right, Yaakov Katz, thank you for answering our 18 questions. Where can people find more about you? About your thoughts?
Twitter is one place.
Twitter.
But I write regularly. I have a weekly column at the Jerusalem Post. I write every other week, 1 week for Newsweek as well, 1 week for the Jewish Chronicle. So I do write a lot. I have books that people can order. And if I could plug, the 3 of them are on Amazon.
And your forthcoming book.
And I have a forthcoming book that will be coming out probably closer to the fall of 2025. And I also am a senior fellow at a think tank here in Jerusalem called the Jewish People Policy Institute, JPPI, and I host a bi-weekly podcast where we talk about current events, what's happening in Israel, and people who are doing interesting things when it comes to the future of Israel and the Jewish people. So
Amazing. Thank you
lots
so
of
much.
opportunity.
Definitely.